Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by my seafaring companion, Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing? You okay?
I don't know this name, Julian Darius. I only respond to the Mariner.
Yeah, well, I have another name. They refer to me as Ulysses now. I have watched the longer cut. We are going to be talking today. You probably already know because it's in the title and stuff. We're going to be talking about Wet Kev and Dances with Waves. That's right. They took the Mad Max. They took the Mad Max idea and gave it to Kevin Costner and took it onto the water. We're going to be talking about 1995's Waterworld, one of the biggest critical and commercial flops of the 90s. One of the most expensive films made at the time, and one of its biggest flops. But if we go back with retrospective, are we going to Howard the Duck this? Are we going to go back and actually say how much we actually like this, or are we going to basically throw it back into the sea and let it drown? I don't know. What are your initial thoughts then on Waterworld?
Complicated, frankly. I mean, I saw this in theaters. I knew the backstory. You know, it was like Titanic, right? Like how over budget it had run. It was a big story at the time. I saw it. I thought it wasn't as bad as other people thought. I did think, you know, I kept thinking watching it, and I still think today that it proves the concept of an Aquaman film because I was a comics geek. I still think that because the Aquaman film we got was such a steaming turd, you know, that this is still a better Aquaman film because he does have gills. He breathes underwater. Watching it again today, I sort of think it is legitimately bad. But that last hour, like it starts as a super serious movie. The first half of it is dreadful. Like,
Yes.
I mean, it's very serious. Like you could cut everything but like maybe 20 minutes of the first hour and not miss anything. That last hour or so is really good. You know, and I think it goes gonzo. Like by the time you have jet skis colliding as somebody is, you know, bungee cording, you know, above the explosion, you're in straight like Escape from New York territory, right? That is not where this movie begins, and that is a very better a much better movie than the movie starts. So my views are complicated. What are your thoughts, Scott? Your opening?
Yeah, no, I think I have a similar sort of feeling towards this film. That it's sort of like it's complex feelings towards this film because I'm a big Mad Max fan and I like this idea of sort of like dystopian, you know, post-apocalyptic futures and all sort of stuff. And I like the concept of a water world, like you know, this idea of adapting to this new environment. It's unusual. It's relative. It's used relatively interesting. I have thoughts about how people would adapt to this, but I've often watched the theatrical version, 135 minutes, and I've had questions about things. For this recording, I've finally got. I have the Arrow. I've got it here. I have the Arrow video release. I bought it a couple of years ago, and I finally watched the Ulysses cut, which is 176 minutes. So it's almost like a 3-hour version of the film. They inserted 40 minutes of footage. Extra footage, and what I would say is it makes what I agree is a complicated and bad film better, and what it does, it adds depth to certain characters. However, it still doesn't need to be 3 hours long. you're right. There's massive sections of this film that can be cut out. But watching it this time, the thing I realized that was the problem is Kevin Costner.
Yeah.
I think Kevin Costner is such the wrong casting for this film, that it stands out like a sore thumb now. You're right. This is a film that should have been a silly action adventure kind of film, like similar to like the more. This should be more like Thunderdome than anything else, and it has those allusions towards the end. But you're right. That first part, it's trying to sort of, I don't know. There's just something about the sort of Kevin Costner clearly wants this to be some sort of serious epic, like some sort of like I don't know. But you're right. It's so sort of like I want to watch the film that Dennis Hopper's making, not the film that Kevin
Yeah.
Costner's making.
And let's be clear, Dennis Hopper is a terrible actor.
Oh,
You know,
100%.
I mean, he
Yeah.
plays the same guy and everything. He's crazy. He's hopped up, you know, but he knows that this is ridiculous.
Yes.
And he is so much more enjoyable. And, to me, it's funny what I remember about this movie because I've seen this movie in clips on TV over the years, but I haven't sat there and watched it all the way through maybe once since it came out.
Mm.
So not for some time. And when I think about what I remember, everything is in that last hour. I remember the diving to the city.
Mm.
That's a beautiful scene.
Mm.
That's like you're like 45 minutes left, like that's a great scene. I don't know why they happen to dive right where there's a city, but it is a great, like, it has a sense of wonder. It has a sense of like, yeah, the world's gone to shit. Here's the sunken ruins. That's the, like Planet of the Apes, kind of like this sense of ruins, this kind of sense of, real post-apocalyptic
Well,
stuff.
it's the end of Thunder. Sorry, it's the end of Mad Max Thunderdome. Beyond Thunderdome, it's the same thing. They fly over Sydney, and it's in ruins. Like it's the
It's
same thing.
affecting.
It is good. It's yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, so that's the one connection you have to the world that was before Waterworld.
Mm.
Because until then, it's just guys on water. Like, it's super boring, right? I mean, it's dumb, it's boring. You know, but I remember that, and I don't even remember that he has gills. I don't even remember, because that's not really that important to that scene, right? He has to have gills for that scene to work, but you only see his gills like once really in the whole movie.
Mm.
Um, you know, and then so I remember that scene, and then I remember the whole Exxon Valdez, the Exxon Valdez, like stuff, and that it's like made no sense whatsoever, and
Mm.
it's completely over the top, and there's Dennis Hopper playing a guy with a horribly scarred missing eye, screaming as guys are blowing up, and that's what I remember. And I remember kind of like feeling like with the shot that's the Exxon Valdez, like, oh, that's the end of uh it's the end of like what the vampire movie Tarantino plays in and
Just Till
Rodriguez
Dawn.
from Dusk Till Dawn, right? Where it's
Mm.
like this is the Mayan ruin, right? Like and it makes no sense whatsoever,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
Exxon Valdez is not in service and would like does not have particles the size of skyscrapers. I mean, none of this makes any sense. But it's this kind of like I got that even as a kid. This
Yeah.
kind of like postmodern Frank Miller esque over the top thing, and I loved it. And those are the two things that I remember, and they're both like in the last 45 minutes.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the '90s. What I was thinking about as I was watching it this time is exactly what you're saying. There are huge stretches of this film that are incredibly earnest, and they're trying to sort of have some serious drama, or they're trying to do something, and then it's sort of injected with some sort of like ridiculousness, and the ridiculousness is way more fun. And when it's earnest and stuff, it's always Kevin Costner, and I'm just like, okay. And what I was thinking about as I was watching this, I was thinking, well, what else had come out in the 90s that sort of, there was this, because in the 90s we got Escape from LA, which is obviously the sequel to Escape from New York. But we also got like the closest I could think of was Tank Girl, which again maybe one day we'll talk about because that film is batshit crazy. That film is like so was
I
the
was a
comic.
huge fan at the time of both the comic and the movie.
Yeah, Laurie Petty is really good, and I think it's one of those weird ones where it's sort of like, it knows it's mad, and it's a bit like you go back and watch you go back and you watch Thunderdome, and I kind of love. Everyone talks about Road Warrior as the best Mad Max film.
Yeah, screw that.
But I think Thunderdome is gloriously insane. Where like George Miller's like, oh no, I'm gonna have like Tina Turner running Bartertown, and we're gonna have like this and that and all these other crazy stuff. And I'm like, cool, like you've gone nuts. And that's what I think you sort of if you're gonna do this, you'd sort of need that. And I think that's the problem with this film. Is like it doesn't really know where it's sitting in that thing. Like it wants to be taken serious, but like it also wants to have, like you say, I actually really enjoy the attack on the atoll. When sort of like down top of the first attack on the atoll, and like you say, they've got like the jet skis. They pull up ramps, and you've got people on skis being pulled by a plane, and they come over the wall and all this other stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in for all this. Like, this is brilliant. I'm really enjoying this. It's making me smile. And then they escape, and I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to sit with these three arguing now for the next 40 minutes on a catamaran. All right. Like it goes into tedium.
Yeah, I did not like that attack. I mean, I like the idea of the ramps that you're talking about. But I thought that first of all, there are basic problems with the way it's shot. I don't know who I'm looking at. I don't know what's happened, in very basic ways that I would associate with a filmmaker who just has no idea what they're doing. I'm often confused, and I have to, jump back 30 seconds or, a minute to kind of just figure out, like, who did I just see explode? I don't know. And why did they explode? I don't know. I mean, they're just basic questions like that. But to me that fight is sort of, and we might disagree on this, that fight is sort of the arguably the moment where I have lost faith in the movie. And that's because, for me, the thing that is terrible about Waterworld, and I like the Mad Max thing, right? I mean, I'm totally with you on Thunderdome. I think Thunderdome is kind of a masterpiece, a sort of B movie masterpiece. I kind of love it, but for me, the thing that I don't understand about Waterworld is I never believe for a second that this is humanity surviving on water. I mean, I never believe that. It's just nobody in the movie believes that either. I mean, I don't know how humanity has survived on the water to begin with. I don't find this, there's not enough water to flood the globe to this degree. That's fine. I'm willing to suspend disbelief. But even if we were left on water for hundreds of years, which it's got to have been, for you find out later that like dry land is like totally a myth to them. They believe that the world began with a flood rather than ended with it, right? So I don't believe for a second that this has been going on for hundreds of years. But what I really don't believe is, like, there is no way that humanity is left living on water and there are this many fires, right? Like, why are you using gasoline this many years later? Like, why do you have machine guns and they're pumping rounds and I'm watching the rounds fall into the ocean? Like, characters are constantly throwing things into the ocean. Later on, like, they're cutting ropes And I'm thinking, right, that's one less rope that humanity has left, because you're not going to weave any more ropes, right? Like
Well,
that's,
one of
I
the
mean, that kind of just it infuriates me
so
every time a piece of, like, when he shows that dirt to them and says like, "Oh, I've got dirt," and I'm watching dirt blow in the breeze out of the bag. Like, it doesn't matter. And I'm like, nobody would behave this way. You do not believe that you are on water. I'm
well,
sorry.
no, you're right. No, one of the things is, and it's a key sort of fundamental issue I have, and because I've been watching The Walking Dead, and
Hmm.
I was whilst watching this, it sort of struck me as well. So, two things, because we recently had over here, we had a petrol crisis, a fuel crisis, where there was like, oh my god, we're going to run out, and everyone rushed out to the pumps and was sort of like filling up the cars and tanks and all this other stuff. And one of the things I learned from that period is stored petrol or diesel, and like, only lasts about 6 months, and then it sort of, if it's sat doing nothing, it actually sort of is it can damage your vehicle. Like, if you use it, it's been sat there for a certain amount of time, it can damage your vehicle. So there's a lifespan, like a use by date for fuel. So we learned that it was in this country. So now I watch things like The Walking Dead and this, where they're like, it's 6 years since the main, since, I'm going, like, how the hell is anything working? Because you're not refining the oil into any
Right.
sort of form of usable fuel. So that always bothers me now when I see the smokers. And the same for Mad Max. Like, it doesn't make any sense. But one of the things
And Walking Dead, right?
and The Walking Dead, exactly. Like, it infuriates me now. I watch this and I'm like, all the cars should stop. Like, everybody should be on horseback or that thing. But one of the things,
everybody should be on bicycle.
yeah. Well, one of the things I've realized with all these sort of post-apocalyptic things is we go towards some sort of steampunk version of medieval times. That's what we seem to end up with. Do you know what I mean? Like this, there's a crux of civilization that's basic enough that you don't need to have specialist knowledge, or specialist knowledge is achievable enough without too much industrialization, right? It's a pre-industrialized society. That's what we end up going back to, right? So I'm like, okay, cool, let's go to that. Let's take that down that path. Let's go down that path, right? And let's take Waterworld, for example. At least and it's shown, maybe I can't remember if this is in the theatrical cut, but in the Ulysses cut, the longer cut, there are a couple of scenes where within Dennis Hopper on that ship, you see things like they are collecting the shells. So they are actually trying to collect as many of the shells as possible. And it goes back to the ship, and you see that they have some form of weapons manufacturing. So they are actually creating bullets and this other thing. So you go, okay, it's not enough to do what you're doing. I get that. But at least you're trying. You're trying in some capacity to say, this is what they're doing. And it's clearly a message of sort of like, these are these post-industrial people and the pollution, and they're all smoking, and he wants cars, and it's about and stuff like that. But you're right. But
what is the message? I mean, what is the message there? Like, okay, so let me just say, in the theatrical cut, that's not there.
No.
On the Valdez, but you do see them collecting the shells when they're when they're shooting at the atoll sort of station, right? Briefly you see them collecting shells, but you also see plenty falling into the ocean later.
Yes.
So it's like, this is very inefficient.
Oh yeah, no, it pays off a little bit in the longer cut, but again, like you say, it's not enough for me to go, that's how you're fueling your war against these people. The other thing that's in the longer cut that sort of that I think is interesting and sort of feeds into this is the motivation, especially for Dennis Hopper's character. So it's supposed to be at least 2 centuries beyond the deluge, as they call it, sort of this flooding of the world. And I don't know how long that happens. Now, just as a side note, one thing I do love is the Universal logo at the start of this film.
I do too. I'm glad you
Universal
mentioned
goes, the Universal goes away, and then the world slowly floods. And
that.
I think that is really well done. And I thought that's a really
Oh,
cool little opener.
no, it's brilliant. I love when
Yeah,
they do that.
yeah. But what you find is that Dennis Hopper's character called the Deacon, and so he's using a sort of like a corruption of sort of Christianity or of religion for this thing of dry land. And he actually has a speech at one point, which is definitely not in the theatrical cut, but he talks to, I think like the Kevin Costner, the Mariner, and he talks about this thing to find expansion. Oh, it's the little girl. He tells the little girl, like, he says, the idea is, I want land because we are the church of eternal growth. There's more people on here. I want land, and we want to expand. We want to build. We want to do this. And so Dennis Hopper and all the people on the ship represent modernity. They are there to be. They are post-industrial, and the filth and the dirty and the pollution that is the post-industrial world. That's the point, and they are going to find land and they're going to fuck it up again, and that's sort of like that's why they're the baddies. And you're trying to sort of everybody else is now back to basics and back to nature. But the problem is, and this is the point I want to make, when you do go to the atoll and you go to a couple of other places, if this is 200 years later, they haven't adapted at all. They're still trying to have a dry land existence just out at sea. And so you have this atoll and they've got all this sort of thing, but like, no, what this film didn't do is go and look at civilizations that exist now that do have a water or sort of a sea-based society in some form, and you go, cool, why didn't you go look at Polynesian cultures? Why didn't you go look at sort of Japanese cultures? Why didn't you go look at these sort of these other areas that sort of live on these sort of coastal things and live off the sea? Like, why do they not have like massive things that do fishing or this other stuff? Like, nothing in this. I was very confused by some of this stuff.
I mean, the most essential difference is that we live currently in a disposable culture, right? All of our products come in packaging, which is predominantly made of plastic and is going to end up in a landfill. There's also internal packaging, right? Our clothes are disposable. In the Western world, we buy more clothes every year than our parents did because clothes are cheaper. And so fashion is now disposable. We used to buy a coat and say, that's the last coat I'm going to buy. I mean, that isn't the case. We buy a coat and say, well, if it's good for 2-3 years, fine. We live in a disposable culture. They still live in a disposable culture. I mean, it's like the filmmakers can't get out of that mentality.
Agreed.
And that is, to me, the most infuriating thing. And if you're going to have an ecological message, the most basic thing that you've got to imagine is not just like, oh wow, Kevin Costner's got to drink his own urine, right? like that's a kind of like gross out like kind of thing, superficial thing. You've got to go at least a step further and imagine a non-disposable society, because you cannot throw things away, and you also can't set things on fire. You can't, like if you murder somebody, you don't. They talk about like recycling Kevin Costner when he's in the cage and he's put into like this mud pit, but he doesn't die. I mean, you don't ever find out what that means, right? Well, other times bodies are just casually thrown in the ocean. You're blowing things up. They burn his ship. Why would you do any of this? Every atom of material is precious. Every atom of fresh water is precious. There's a fundamental inability to imagine what this would be like that I don't understand. Not to mention, where did these giant monster fish come from that Kevin Costner is allowing himself to be eaten by to kill, I guess?
Yes.
Like, it's shot really poorly. It's just like, it's very confusing. But apparently he is allowing himself routinely to be eaten by giant whale-like Jurassic World like, sort of
Creatures.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, how that's fast evolution. Like, I don't get it. Like, I agree. I 100% agree with everything you're saying about this disposable nature, because one of the things that sort of like and about the recycling pit again, like that baffled me. I was like, what is it you're recycling, and for what purpose? Like, where is that gunge going? Have you got like a big bucket that just sits in, or is that going into the sea? Like, I don't understand what the point is. But one of the things is,
No, you need to take all the water out of that body and eat everything else.
which is, we talk about Tank Girl. That's exactly the point of Tank Girl. They have like a dehydration unit. One of the things I also find confusing in this film, and it wasn't until watching it this time that it really struck home and really started to irritate me, is, and I sort of understand why they do it from a filmmaking point of view, but this obsession with pre-flooding or the pre-flood items. And so there's this thing of like, we've got paper and all this other stuff, and you're like, right, okay, well, what how do you know to call it paper? You've got there's a religious system here that seems to think the world started with the deluge. All right, if it did, how do you know about pre-flood items, and why do you give a shit? Like, why do you care? We don't go around going, oh, do you know what? I'm trading in 17th century buttons because they're really rare. Well, someone might be, but it's not a thing. I can't turn up to like Tesco's and start trading and bartering in 17th century items because they're a couple of hundred years old. Look, it makes no sense. This thing of dirt as well. Like, all right, dirt is important. Why is dirt important? Is it because you grow things from them? Because the thing is, the thing I was curious about is, he has a jar of dirt, right? But he's also got a lime tree.
Yeah.
And I'm like, so you've already got dirt in that thing. That's what there are roots growing in that. So you've got dirt. Like, is that the point of dirt? Is that why dirt is important?
Right.
Because there's no other purpose. Yeah, it should be. Like, you want to grow things. But how do they know that? I'm surely they'd evolved beyond that. So again, and the other thing as well is, like, they're growing limes because, again, they make points and then they don't follow them up, because the point of eating a lime, which is why we're called limeys, by the way, by certain people, is to prevent scurvy.
Well, from the shipping, right?
Yes, exactly. Like, the British Navy used to they use limes and stuff to prevent scurvy. So you get vitamin C and other vitamins because it was cheap and easy to do, rather than actual feed them proper food. That's what we're called limeys. So if that's the case, but then when you go to the atoll at other places, no one else is eating lime. So they should all be sort of like suffering from rickets. They should all be like, they should have fragile bones. They should be sort of really suffering from illness. Like, no one's eating vegetables because they can't grow anything. Like, it makes no sense.
Yeah, what are they eating? I mean,
yeah,
I had the same thought. Like I kind of like the idea. I really do like that the Mariner can go underground and get, dirt, right? And get stuff from these cities, and that's how he's prospered. I don't know why there are these mutations, just like but whatever. I mean, I do like that. But he trades dirt, and one of the things he trades it for is a tomato tree. As you say, like about the lives, there's dirt in that tomato tree that tomato tree is growing from. Probably more than the handful of dirt that he traded.
Yeah.
So, like, how does that work? And then I think, like, I have investigated hydroponics. Why are they not using hydroponics? Like, why are they just like, golly gee, we don't know anything except for, let's use a handful of dirt. And also soil really becomes infertile really quickly. You've got to recycle it. You've got to, you can't just take a handful of dirt and say, that's why you can't grow indoors and just, grow, the same, tomato plant in the same bucket over and over again. Within a generation or two, that soil gets bad and you've got to replace it with more indoor soil.
well, same thing's going to happen. I mean, again, there's a kind of like basic failure of the imagination of the
Yeah,
filmmakers.
I agree. And it seems to be this thing of, like you said, they can't seem to get away with, they can't get away from, um, they can't get away from the notion of how society works in the 1990s. Like you say, they seem to be so limited because this thing of myth of dry land as well. I get it as to why it would exist. We live in a world of wet, so there's this myth of dry land. You go, okay, cool. 250 years into the future, okay, cool. You're generations ahead of anyone that could experience dry land for the most part. But I still find that you've still got copies of National Geographic kicking around
Yes.
and stuff, and I'm like, I don't, as people have they lost the ability to read? Is if paper is a thing, yet I know it's the mariner. He's sought them from below, right? But water damage things get messed up. Like if you leave a
Yeah.
magazine underwater, especially salt water for any period of time, like it will dissolve. There is nothing on that paper. And so again, there's all these things. You sort of asked, like, what is the time scale on this? At one point, they make it quite clear, and I can't remember if this is in the theatrical cut as well, but they make it quite clear that at least 2 centuries have passed since the world flooded. It's explicitly stated at one point there's at least 2 centuries. And I'm like, cool. That's 200 years of people just standing still then as a survival culture. But things would change and stuff. I don't know, it feels static.
Well, I agree with you, and again, I think it's this failure of the imagination. I mean, there's no line in the theatrical cut that's 2 centuries. The closest we have is this talk about how the world wasn't created in a deluge; it was ended. I've seen it, right? Okay, there's no talk about this. Like the deacon kind of preaches, but he is not a religious leader in the theatrical cut, really at all. He's called that. He has one speech, but it's more political speech. It's not, there's no religious aspect. I found myself thinking of like, I mean, this is, I hate to be that guy, but of Star Wars and the sort of like, oh, the Jedi, aren't they a myth? Well, you guys all remember the Jedi, right? Like,
Yeah.
where it's like, like the world, we don't remember how the world ended. Yeah, but you guys are like clearly value paper. You have at least some culture of reading English and speaking English, and that paper's got stuff written on it. So like it serves no other purpose except as like to look at it and celebrate the world that's gone, right? Like I don't understand. And the other thing is like I don't believe I don't believe anything about this movie. And I think that's the basic until it becomes a wacky Mad Max movie with an hour to go, and which I don't at which point I don't care and it's just silly and it works or it doesn't. But until it becomes that, I don't believe anything about this movie.
Well,
I
and
don't.
this is the thing that you're right, because I think one of the things is let's compare it to Thunderdome and even Tank Girl, because Tank Girl is a bit of a misfire. You're right. There are logistical problems with Waterworld on every level. Like, how does the fuel work? You've got this tanker full of oil, and there's little, but yet then you've got this sort of sea-based society, civilization that's going around and doing stuff. Okay, well, this thing of the atoll, that if you were to go, it should be more nomadic. It should be continually moving and all this other stuff. Or doing like you say, there's a complete lack of imagination. Why is it fixated with the world before, yet seems to deny that there was a world before? All these contradictions, and that's when it tries to get earnest and tries to answer these questions. one of the reasons there's all these problems exist in the Mad Max world, completely exist, right?
Yeah.
However, because the film sort of goes, well, we don't care, so you don't have to care. Just enjoy the fact that you're going to get, Barter Town. You're going to get a guy playing a saxophone whilst two guys fight out in Thunderdome. Like, you're going to get a small person on top of a massive person of Master Blaster. Like, you're going to get all this other crazy shit. Go with it, right? You sort of go, all right, I'm in for the ride. Like, for example, Thunderdome has this exact same problem with the kids. Those kids that exist in the far whatever in the outback. I have no idea how long they're supposed to have been there because they seem to be talking about a jet plane. So
yeah,
and so this problem of timelines exists within
yeah,
Mad Max because the first Mad Max film clearly isn't a post-apocalyptic film; it's more of a dystopian
right.
film. So it exists, but I don't care because the fun of the film and the silliness of the film papers over that. The problem with what Waterworld is there's so much time to contemplate the stuff that you're being shown because of the pacing that it all comes to the fore where you go, right, well, I'm a bit bored of them arguing, but I'm going to start questioning all the shit that's going on. And so it just becomes a real problem because it's really the thing that's in the forefront for a lot of parts of the film.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if it's exactly the pacing. I mean, I find the Mad Max films slow.
Mm,
Um, but I mean, and I like Thunderdome best, but I think the first two have that sort of like road warrior,
mm,
thundering engine action, low
mm,
budget action thing. And the third is going for like a much more kind of like pop culture, zany, like I mean, there's even cargo cult stuff, and
yeah.
love to talk about it. I mean, it's a smart movie in a lot of ways, totally daft and dumb in others,
Mm,
but this, like, it wants to be a smart movie.
mm,
But like I'm never. I mean, you think about like the history of discovery on this planet. Well, I mean, it took us a long time to discover, Hawaii and New Zealand and, these outskirts. But if we're sailing around in, motorboats and shit, it's not going to take us that long. No landmass. Also, why is it Japan? It's pretty clearly Japan. Like, why is Japan is not the highest place on the
oh,
planet? Like, I mean,
it's not Japan.
what is it?
It's Everest.
Is it Everest? Then
It's
why?
it's clearly stated. So this is the thing you don't get in your cut that you do get in. So in the Ulysses cut, there's a whole
It
section at
doesn't
the
look
end.
like Everest.
No, it doesn't because the climate has changed and all
Okay.
this other shit. That's supposed to be the point. So the Ulysses cut ends with him being the woman whose character is I can't remember, don't care, grumpy woman. She basically says to him of the stories Ulysses about a person that because he leaves, doesn't he? He goes back to the sea because
Hmm.
of course he would. He's literally an evolved fish person. Like it makes more sense. When he goes back, she says about this thing about being banished for 10 years. Like Ulysses, the story of Ulysses goes, and then the gods were unhappy, so they banished him for 10 years, but he finally made it home. And so if he basically saying, if you ever make it back here, you've got a home here, kind of thing. But she calls him,
Hmm.
she gives him a name in Ulysses, and he takes it. Hence the Ulysses cut. But then they run up to the top of the mountain, and I think this is in the theatrical cut, and they wave him and they watch him sort of going off into the sea, and that's the end of the film.
Hmm.
Right? There's at least a 30-second clip that's not in the theatrical cut. They find something on the floor and they uncover the dirt, and it's a plaque that says in 1953 this mountain was conquered by Edmund Hillary. And then it's
Right.
obviously this is the Mount of Everest, and you're like, oh, they're on Everest, the highest point in the world, which took me straight to Google, and I was like, what are the 5 highest mountain ranges or the
Right.
highest mountains in the world? And the top 5 have got all exist within a 200-meter range.
Yeah.
So this isn't the only landmass. There's probably others around the world. So
Probably. Yeah.
yeah. So that was just it. Just sort of I was like, okay.
Well, and what I would imagine within 200 years. I mean, I don't believe that humans are going to survive at sea for an extended period of time,
Mm.
especially these humans who have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah.
Clearly, there's going to be like fiefdoms around the few mountaintops that are left jutting out of the water. And societies are going to be organized around them.
Mm.
This seems to be like a primitive paradise around, what I hoped was Everest, but I thought like they see these dead people and there's like kind of like some sort of Japanese-esque, script.
Yes.
Um, like I don't know what's that about.
Well, I was a bit, I don't know
If it's
because
Everest, I mean,
yeah,
because I
I'm
kind of like hoped it was Everest, but
no, I mean, I wanted to sort of because one of the things that I was curious about was that there's the girl who plays Enola, the young girl who is
hmm,
tattooed. So I was like, okay, I was curious. So she has a very distinctive look, and I was like, I mean, so I was like, oh, have they chosen her because of her ethnic origin? Is she sort of supposed to be of Polynesian or some sort of descent? No, I thought maybe that's it. It's a '90s film, so I'll give that a slate. But yeah, no, it's not. But I was like, okay, so that's the Himalayas then. If it's so, were they of Tibetan or Himalayan descent? Don't know. I don't know how long they survived up there. But the other thing I was more curious about is like no one has survived there. There is
right.
no like village. There
Tribal
is
culture.
no
I mean,
tropical culture, which like they should rock up there and find like
yeah,
some like some sort of culture. And it's clearly filmed for me. That feels like it's filmed in some Polynesian island. Like this is
yeah.
filmed in Hawaii or something like that.
Hmm.
Um, so I'm like, yeah, why don't they rock up and just find there's a whole a different bunch of people there? Like that was the ending I was expecting. Even like watching, even though I know I've watched a few times, I was like, do they come across people? I can't remember. They should do.
Well, they come across like this hut with this man and
Yeah.
woman in it, their bodies, and they're covered in spider webs. And they have these books, and there's like kanji,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but okay, so why are they there? I mean,
Well, that they're supposed
nobody's
to be.
there.
They're her parents. That's Enola's
But
parents.
but
But
what was their society? Like, how long have they been dead? How did she get off this tropical paradise? I mean,
don't know.
none of it makes any sense.
No, it doesn't. 100% doesn't make any sense because it's almost like Superman. Like we're dead. We must send our child out into the world. How is this like Moses? Did you send her out in a reed
Yeah, but
basket?
at
Like
least
I
they had a
don't get it.
spaceship, dude. Like, what? How, how did this even work?
Well,
Like,
that's the problem.
did
Like
they
you
put her
say,
on like a little raft and say, "I hope you're found before you run out of fish"?
I don't know because at one point in the version I watched, Helen, I'll just check the name, does say, "I found her." But that's it. It's not like, oh, I found her floating on a raft or anything like that. Like, there's no explanation of where this little girl's come from. Um,
This is so bad, man. Like,
oh, it is.
I
It's
mean,
all
like
yeah,
this is getting worse as we're talking about it. I'm less convinced that Waterworld is like an undiscovered gem. The more we're talking about it, the more I'm like, oh no, this is like legit bad.
yeah. Well, this is the thing. It's like it, if you're having a 3 hour cut of this film and you still have major plot and world building problems like this, then you've got a real problem. Like this is yeah, bad writing.
So can I point out the fact that like the map on her back, like, this is such a cliche, right? Like the map on somebody's butt. Why did her parents put that on her body? I mean, like, I don't know. Like, why did they set her adrift? What happened to them? None of that is ever explained. None of that makes any sense.
Can
The
I
map
say that?
seems to be a compass point.
Yes, it's got they translate it as numbers, don't they? So it's a longitude and latitude. So yeah,
But but it's not a map then. It's
no,
just coordinates.
mm.
The actual map that's there for a visual is a circle with basically like a
But
compass point pointing down.
with an arrow, we are
Yeah,
here.
like go south. Like, how is that a map?
But
Because it's not a map.
can I just point out two of the things that really wind me up about this? That watching it this time really bothered me, and it was so silly. So I don't speak Japanese, so I'm gonna allow the translation element, right? So that they use certain characters, fine, and we don't get their culture. I've had tattoos. I've got and mine were done mechanically. They had a tattoo needle and that sort of thing, right? And I was in my teens when I had my first one, my late teens. It's not so much that it hurts, but you remember it. Like there is a certain feeling you get from being repeatedly tattooed. They did it with the Maori way, so that sort of Polynesian culture, with a needle and an ink and a hammer, right? I guarantee that freaking hurts, right?
Amen. Yeah.
If you're doing that to have solid ink on a child, right? That child remembers that. Like,
Yeah.
where did you get that tattoo? I don't know. No, you know that when you were a child, you were held down and you were pinpricked thousands of
For
times
hours.
for hours. Yeah. And I'm going like, that's ridiculous. The other point is, it's not until it becomes a plot point later in the film is you have to hold her upside down for it to make sense.
Right.
Because the world flipped its polar axis or something, and you're like, oh, so not only did we have the flooding because of the polar ice caps, we also had the magnetic poles switched as well. And I'm just like, when he holds her upside down and they figure it out, I'm like, was this a mistake? Or has the pole switched since the flood? Which disaster are we now talking about? Like, I don't. It's such a stupid thing where I'm like, why did you do it so it's upside down on this poor child? Like, it makes no sense. Did they start and be like, oh man, I've started copying upside down. Might as well finish. Someone will
Yeah.
figure it
I
out.
mean, I thought the implication is I thought that the poles flipped and that caused the flood. But then why would you inscribe the tattoo upside down and the coordinates are backwards, right?
Yeah.
Um yeah, I mean, I don't it doesn't make sense. I
But the
mean,
film thinks that's clever. The film thinks that's clever.
yes. No, you're right. Yeah.
And
I
this time I'm like, I don't understand. I'm scratching my head going like, what, why? Like, this is clearly like someone's made an error.
yeah, I mean, there's no timeline. And I guess this is what's so infuriating. And there are things that are good
Mm,
about this movie. I think it does prove the Aquaman concept. I mean,
mm,
it does, like, the shot of him diving is good. I mean, I think the over the top stuff for the Exxon Valdez is sort of, in the Dust Till Dawn sort of campy, over
mm.
the top stuff. It's good. I mean, that whole sequence works pretty well. Even the like, he's coming for you. Like, she doesn't know any of that stuff. That's some total, just like the worst sort of like escape from New York moments where you're like, or even like, the Chinatown. Um,
Mm,
yeah, I mean, just like it's so over the top, but it works pretty well.
mm.
I mean, it's entertaining for sure. Um, I don't know. I mean, but what's mind-boggling is like the money spent on this,
Oh
and
yeah,
nobody asked what is the timeline of humanity's demise, right? Like, how does this world work? Why do they care about dirt? Nobody cares about any of this. None of this is important. Why are you using like napalm and shit?
yeah.
Like what is going on?
This is the
That
thing.
stuff, it's really hard for me to forgive.
Yeah. No, I agree, and it's sort of I agree. Once this film sort of lets go of its pretenses, I have a lot more fun. I do
Mhm.
enjoy the battle at the atoll at the beginning. I think it's silly. It's slightly extended on the version I watched. And you're right. The stuff at the end, the finale, is actually kind of good fun. I mean, I like the fact they've got a guy who exists. He lives down in a rowing boat in the oil to measure it and stuff. And when the mariner drops the flare down there, he's like, "Oh, thank God!" Like, him
Yeah.
be like that bit is kind of makes me laugh. Like that echoes the silliness, the George Miller excess silliness of
Hmm.
like a Mad Max. I'm liking that kind of stuff. Um, you're right, but the rest of it sort of like they don't think they don't think it matters, but it makes up so much of the film that it sort of got to matter. And I think that's where this film sort of really does fall down, and where like like you said, but you said the money spent on this. This was a huge flop, and really cost Universal. But again, it's one of those things that even if they were making it, like I didn't do any of the behind the scenes stuff, I haven't really watched it yet, but I get the feeling like if you were watching this being made, you must be going like, this is a mistake.
Yes.
Like this it's like Cutthroat Island is another famous massive flop. The Gina Davis pirate film was from around the same time where they built massive sets. And you watch that film and you must be someone on set must have been going like, this is not going to work. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, and it's an interesting one where I don't know who's responsible for this, but it feels like the excesses, are there, but like not in any, because you hear about these excesses, like you hear about films like the making of Apocalypse Now,
Yeah.
where you go, oh man, it almost drove someone crazy, and these people really suffered. However, we got
But
Apocalypse
that was a
Now.
great movie.
Yeah,
Right.
you get out
Like
of it, you
it's
get
amazing.
you get Apocalypse Now, and you go right. It sort of come together. Even I would even say Mad Max Fury Road,
I
where
agree.
like everyone was going like, even like Tom Hardy was like arguing with George Miller, going like,
Yeah.
this is crazy, I don't understand it. And then what you get out of it, you go, oh yeah, like
This is brilliant.
this is
Like, yeah,
amazing,
no,
yeah.
yeah.
And so you sort of see the output, and I'm sure someone must have been saying, no, you wait till this comes out the editing room. And then it doesn't, and you're
No,
just like, oh no.
I mean, I do wonder about that sort of response to cost on set. And, and I'm one of those guys who's just like, I have no tolerance for somebody who is repeatedly an hour or more late for
Mm-hmm.
shooting,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, you hear these stories on sets, or right, this location is going to cost us this much more a day, and you say, you know, does it really matter? I mean, is the audience going to notice that like the sun is, you know, 10 degrees off? Do you have
Mm.
to rebuild the Western town, because the sun isn't perfectly aligned with your vision of the street? I mean, screw you, like, come on, make another movie with the money that you're going to save. I mean, I have little tolerance for that. So shooting on water is notoriously expensive.
Yeah.
like the concept of Waterworld is such an indulgent, expensive concept. I mean, there's, not just Jaws, but like every movie where they've ever talked about shooting on water, there's a story behind the scenes of people going like, right, how can we not do that? you know?
Well, notoriously, even Titanic, where they were like, we're not filming this at sea. We're not going to do this on an open. But so they built a massive tank of water, um,
Hmm.
so they could control it. And they were saying that's the benefit of that. They've been able to do that. But you're right. Like, I'm just quickly checking something, because one of the things I find fascinating is about this film is, as you stack it up, this is 1990. Let's say this is greenlit in 1994, right?
Mhm.
So, epic dystopian future or post-apocalyptic future films are not a big thing, right?
Mhm.
We've not had. It's not like this on a wave. Maybe it's trying to set a trend. I don't know. But even when you look at the cast, right? Dennis Hopper seems like, okay. He's had Speed. He's done a couple of others. Like, you think, yeah, you want a villain, all right. he's going to fit the mold of, like, if that's the film you're making, right? If you're making that film, then fine, he's the person. But then I look at Kevin Costner and
Mm.
his back catalogue, right? From an action point of view,
Well, that's the question.
he's not an action star. Like,
No,
the closest you get is like 1987. You've got like the Untouchables, No Way Out, sort of.
yeah,
Um,
that's a long time before this,
87. The
right?
closest is Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves.
Right,
And
which
you got
is not a great movie and didn't do amazingly.
no, the song did better than the film. You've had Dancing with Wolves, which is obviously an
Yeah,
epic sort of cowboy film, and The Bodyguard, and then he did Wyatt
The
Earp.
Bodyguard. Yeah,
But there's nothing in his catalogue that says to me, this is
you
the
can pull this
guy.
off,
Yeah, this is the
right?
action guy. And I watched it, and again, I'm looking at his catalogue going like, this isn't the charismatic action star. Like, and I know you're not as fan of it, but like, why isn't this? This should not be a Stallone or a Schwarzenegger. This isn't their vehicle. But why is this not like a Kurt Russell or
Mm.
a, I don't know, there's other sort of 90s stars. I'm going, why is this not this other person that could do, like, you've mentioned Escape from New York and stuff. And I'm going, yeah, look at Snake Plissken and go, cool, that's what you want. You want Snake Plissken. You want the American version of Mad Max. Like, you clearly can't ask Mel Gibson to be this role. It's too close. But like, who's close? Who's similar to Mel Gibson that could step in and do this role? Like, it's not
Yeah,
Kevin Costner, and that's the
but I
problem
mean,
with this film.
yeah, I mean, part of the problem is, both Mel Gibson and who played Snake Plissken.
Kurt Russell.
Yeah, both of them are just horrible actors. I mean, just objectively horrible actors
Yeah,
who are really good
but they were
at like,
stars.
yeah, but they're really good at like this. What I'm trying to say is that they both excelled at a certain kind of movie.
Mm,
Like, I do not, I like Kurt Russell, I find annoying in everything that I see him in. Having said that, I mean, I get him in certain roles where he's playing in an over the top surreal universe. I mean, if he's in a Roadrunner cartoon in
mm,
live action, I totally get him. Like, he works in that role really well. And I want to see him in that role where he has to emote or be serious. It does not work. And so, but you're right. But the problem is they didn't think that was this movie.
mm-hmm,
They
mm-hmm.
did not. I mean, you have to decide what this movie is in order to make those casting choices. This was the Kevin Costner bodyguard vehicle. This was the, like, I am the emotional person who can get the guys in the theater, get the women in the theater, and now I want to do this movie, make this happen. And this movie doesn't know that it's Escape from LA.
No,
You know,
100%. Well, no, parts of it do, and that's the thing. Because
yeah,
what I find funny is, like you say,
the best parts.
yeah. So this is the thing. Like, there's to take two. Let's take to take two scenes. There's a scene of when the mariner turns up at the atoll and the whole trading scene, right? And he turns up and he's got his dirt, and then he goes and he buys um everything from the store, and he's like, I'll even take the shelves and that sort of thing. Like, it's supposed to have an element of like grumpy humor to it. You know what I mean? He's supposed to be
Hmm.
sort of grumpy but funny. But Kevin Costner comes across as like a dick throughout this film. He's got no, they do, but like, because one of the things I notice that comes later is he has that thing where he's swimming with Enola, like he's teaching her to swim in the sea, and
Mm.
Helen's watching it, and all I could think of is Terminator 2. There's a scene where Sarah Connor is watching John Connor interact with the T-800, like the Arnie, and she says about in an insane
Mm.
world, the only sane, looking for a father. There's been these guys and there's that guy, but in an insane world, the sanest choice is this robot from the future. And it's a very cheesy scene, but it's sort of like you get the point.
Mm.
And it's clearly they've gone, all right, we're going to take that idea and plant it in Waterworld. That's what we're looking. That's what that scene is. She recognizes that this mutant is the best parental figure and friend for Enola. That's the point. Oh, he's not as bad as we think he is. Fine. But you still need a bit of charisma or a bit of sort of like humor or something to be able to get to that point. And so you have that. And so it's very earnest and very sort of like controlled. Compare that to when you first see Dennis Hopper as the deacon on top on the ship, the Axon Valdez, and he's being pushed around in a Cadillac and handing out cigarettes to children, and all this other stuff. And I'm going like this, and he's going sort of, he's actually saying to people like, don't smoke them all at once. If you break them, they don't work, and all this other stuff. He's saying like which some of it is clearly ad libbed, and he's sort of like and all this other stuff. And I'm like, there's humor here where he knows this is batshit crazy, and he's going like, I'm being pushed around in a Cadillac in a dirty ship, like with these grubby people. I know what I'm doing, and I'm sitting there going like, even the director at some point should have gone, I think I'm directing two different films here. Like these do not gel. Like you could easily take those two scenes, show them if you took them out of context and you showed them to a person, so I'm going to show you two scenes. What are your thoughts? They'd be like, I'd be going, oh, well, they're two very different films. I'll be interested to see where these come from. Like they are vastly different.
Yeah, and we've seen this before, right? I mean, we saw this with Sean Connery, and sort of like the problem of casting an actor who kind of like takes themselves too seriously, right? And clearly that's going on here. I do think that he's not quite that bad. I do think that he does an able performance, but he's not able to laugh at himself. And you're right that there isn't, like, I think he does a good job of portraying like the sort of like Wolverine-esque, just like what he's trying to do is he's trying to do the man with no name, right?
100%. Yeah.
And he's tough and he doesn't speak a lot, and I think he does a good job at that. But that's not what this role needs, right? You point out he needs some kind of charisma. You need to believe why people would follow him. Besides, he's and why we should care about him. And he's just he doesn't have it, and he's not interested in doing it.
No,
he's interested in I mean, and this gets so many male actors, especially from this era, of like, I want to play the tough guy. I want to be Clint Eastwood. Yeah, well, Clint Eastwood wasn't Clint Eastwood.
Exactly.
You have this dumb idea.
Well, if you do, because exactly, I think that the thing is, we've obviously done that comparison for 20th Century Geek. We compared Yojimbo to Fistful of Dollars. Both Mifune and Eastwood knew what those roles were, and sort of like were like, oh, you need to have a bit of humor, otherwise this is a really dry role. And both of them, and Mifune in particular, really knows how to sort of play that comedic role. And Eastwood brings it a bit better and doesn't take it too seriously. If they'd have played it like Kevin Costner plays this, those films would not have been as appreciated as they are. And I think that's the problem. You need someone who can take himself. Bruce Willis is good at this as well. Yes. Like he plays that, again, like, you can put Bruce Willis in, and it's a film I think is massively underrated. I know it's not great, but Hudson Hawk, put him in a surrealist kind of bizarre. I
love Hudson Hawk.
Yeah, and Bruce Willis knows.
We're the only two people on the planet who can say this.
But I think, like, and again, like Fifth Element's a good example, actually. Probably an even better example where you take it to that extent, where you have that rough and ready man with no name, or the sort of the stand-up hero guy in a world gone mad, and he's the one that's he's the one that's looking, winking at the camera, going like, I know this is crazy. I think so too, and I'm frustrated with the insanity as well.
Right.
And that's what he's supposed to be. But like, unfortunately, Kevin Costner, for me, in this film, watching this time, was part of the problem, where I'm going like, oh, you're just as boring and as sort of vacuous as some of the rest of the cast as well. And I think that's part of my problem.
well, that moment you were talking about where he has traded his soil, the dirt, in for chips, and is going to the trading center to
Mm.
barter, and they have nothing on the wall, right? There's nothing about the logic of that makes sense, right? Like,
Yeah.
you don't drive up to a trading center in a post-apocalyptic world and say, give me, like, this is what's left of Disneyland. Give me Disney box. And now I'm going to go to the Disney Center and say, wait a minute, you don't have anything? Why did you trade everything for Disney box? Like, this is silly. You can imagine Bruce Willis saying, like, you mean to tell me, like, I traded all of this for chits, and all you got is a fucking, lantern,
Yeah,
and
you
he'd
need
be
that out.
amazing. He'd
Yeah,
be
you'd
so
need that
good at that.
outrage. You'd need that sort of like outrage of. I'm trying to think of, and I'll tell you actually a good example of this kind of thing. Again, taken to the extreme. Actually, think Bruce Campbell in Army
Mm,
of Darkness when he comes out the pit and he's like, "This is my boomstick," and he basically starts calling them sort of primitive apes, and it's sort of like
mm,
you need that almost disdain, but like frustrated anger of like, look, I know you guys are struggling, but why the hell did you just trade? Like you said, that why did you just
yeah.
trade this for what? Like this makes no sense. Like this is why you're going. This is why you're going to die. There's a scene that is definitely not in the theatrical cut because but that comes shortly after this. When he goes back to his boat, he is approached by the elders of the atoll, right? And there's a rule that is mentioned later on, which it becomes a bit of a population. So population control becomes a bit of a theme in the Ulysses cut as well.
Mm.
And he is presented with this young woman, and they're like,
Oh, yes.
uh,
That's
uh,
in the theatrical cut, too.
okay. And do they mention that she's pregnant in the theatrical cut?
It's ambiguous.
Right.
Like,
It's
I'm
not.
confused. That's one of the many things I'm confused by.
Right.
They
Okay.
talk about, yeah, they sort of say that, but then it seems like they're also asking him to have sex with her.
So what they're saying is basically that you can go off and populate as much as you want. We are giving you this woman. She is pregnant.
Yeah.
We don't have the resources to support the child. So, but you do. So can you basically take her with you? And we are gifting you her as a wife, and you can do whatever you want with her. But basically, we want you to take the child as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, in a discussion between Enola and the deacon, he talks about them being the church of perpetual growth and having more land mass. And there's actually a really good scene where he finds one of the National Geographics on the boat, on the mariner's boat. And he is sort of like, he actually does quite a good performance of going like looking at it and almost weeping at like, look at all this land, look at these amazing
Mm.
pictures of stuff. And he says about that, and she says, well, we don't have children unless we don't grant pregnancy, we don't grant children to be born unless we have the resources to support them on the atoll. And I'm like, that's an interesting concept because there's obviously you've got a bunch of old people kicking about that you're keeping alive. So, like Gregor, the guy with the floaty thing. So I'm like, well, you seem to have that the wrong way around because you need to bring in more people in. But there's this discussion about population growth. So that's what she is. And so there's these other things. But again, the way he reacts to that is this stony face. I don't want her. It's not my problem. And then gets on his boat, and then he's sort of taken hostage or taken prisoner. And it's like, again, if you had like a Bruce Willis or a Kurt Russell or someone who
Yeah.
could do that sort of like slightly sort of comedic, righteous indignation about it all, like you'd be like, yeah, I'm completely sort of like baffled by these backwards people because you're supposed to, like you say, he's supposed to
Right.
become the person they follow. And again, I'm thinking of I wouldn't want Stallone in this, but by any stretch, but like Stallone in Demolition Man is a similar thing to that, where he's going like, he meets the rich people, and he's like, why are we having like a luxurious meal in Taco Bell?
Yeah.
Like this is ridiculous. Your level of luxury is insane compared to the. And then he goes and has a rat burger downstairs, but he's saying like, but why are you attacking? Like, it's he's the person. They become like the audience proxy for calling out the ridiculousness. That's what they're supposed to
Right.
do. And yeah, that's what I feel that is really missing from this, because I'm shouting at the screen going, this is ridiculous. Someone needs to agree with me.
Well, I mean, I think the closest Costner gets to that is when he's sinking in the mud, which again, I'm not sure why there's mud.
Mm.
I mean, like it's part of the execution, but it's like, are they going to revive him and then take his organs as part of the recycling? Why is there mud? I mean, that seems to be a separate part of the middle of this floating atoll, but I mean, none of this makes sense to me. But where he agrees to fight for them, if he's let go, and he just says, "Sure," and
Mm.
it's very deadpan. Like that's the closest Costner ever gets to just like being straight up comedic. Um, and I could see. I was like, "Oh, that's funny." Um, I think actually the kid has some of the funniest lines,
Mm.
especially when she's needling uh the villain. um I think the only line that I actually laughed at was she says, was this your big vision to him?
Yeah.
I don't know, it's just straight up like I laughed out loud. But I agree with you completely, but again I think like to cast somebody who's funny or to encourage Costner to be that means you've got to acknowledge that this is not a serious movie. And
Mm.
this is a
Mm-hmm.
deadly serious movie for at least half of its runtime.
Well, that's the thing. Either because you could do the deadly serious film, but then don't have Dennis Hopper. Like, don't
Yeah.
do the smokers in a different way. Make them a legit. Make them a horror. I mean, I'm talking like make them like the family out of the Texas
Deliverance.
yeah, or Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like you want them to be like really freaky and scary. The like they come out of the, because there's actually some good shots like them coming, the smokers coming out of the sunrise
Mm.
is really cool, and I'm like, that's cool. There's some shots like that I really like, but make it so that is like a horror. Like these people really are terrified now of these sort of like um I think of if you ever watched Firefly, did it when it became in the movie. They have these things called the Reavers, which were people that had sort of like lived in deep space and gone mad. And you're like,
Mm.
yeah, that's what you want. This thing of like these things, these people turn up, like it's terrifying. That's what it should be. But they're not. They're the comedy element. Like, they're sort of, there's a guy who wears a mask that makes pig noises when he fires a big gun. Like it's silly. It belongs in Tank Girl or some other post-apocalyptic film.
Yeah, I mean, what I keep thinking of is you were talking about like Mad Max, and I mean, I thought about Mad Max through the whole movie,
Mm.
positively or negatively. Um, the thing that Mad Max does, and I don't think it's a great franchise. I mean,
Mm.
two of the four movies I like, basically, based on my memory. But, and I guess I do really like them, but, um, you know, is that even the bad stuff, even the dull stuff in the good movies, you have a sense of stakes.
Mm.
You have a sense of like, you feel the desperation. The number one thing you have to do in a post-apocalyptic sort of environment is have a sense of these guys are at the end of their rope, and
Yes.
and I identify with them. I feel for them if they're worried about having the resources for a child, right? Like it's like, the performance is there, the little details are there that make you feel, oh wow, this is really desperate. I really feel for them. At no point in this movie do I ever feel anybody is actually desperate.
Mm.
I don't know exactly why. I don't know if it's the performances. I don't know if it's that whole thing that I have of like you're throwing too much overboard. Like I don't believe that you're really living on water. Um, I just don't feel that anybody is really desperate.
One of the things I find with watching, in comparison to Mad Max, to this, that's interesting is, again, going back to the casting. If you watch a Mad Max film, again, you know, obviously got Mel Gibson, but like beyond that, as you say about this sort of desperation, the cast are, and it's I'm cautious how to say this. They look malnourished. Do you know what I mean? They've made them
Mm-hmm.
look like malnourished and messed up. Like they've taken an effort to be like, we want to make sure you're skinny. We want to make sure you look like you're suffering. Like, you know, we're going to make you look dirty and we're going to make you look this and that. In this, one of the things I'm curious about is no one looks overly tanned.
I wondered about that.
No one looks really malnourished. No one looks, you know, no, it's 200 years, yet everyone looks perfectly white. They all look relatively well fed.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I'm so like, yeah, you don't look you look hugely uncomfortable. Your hair's not like matte, because that's the other thing. If you watch, like, you know, they'll have like matted hair and they'll make them look messed up. No one looks particularly uncomfortable. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
And I find
Yeah.
that you're right, and that's the problem. Even, you know, but when you go to the smokers, it's a little more so. But everyone on the atoll, they've made too clean, and like you say, it never looks like they're starving. They don't be like you say, we're desperate for
Mm-hmm.
hydration or whatever. I don't know. You're right. It never feels like the edge of, um, you know,
Yeah, like they talk about hydro, but you're like, okay, that's a word. Hydro. Like I get it. You're clever. You're calling it hydro instead of water. You know, like you're way too in love with that idea and way too little in love with the idea of like, oh, how would people live out on the water? And I think you make an excellent point. Like I think there's a huge difference between how the set designers design these sets,
mm,
which are, I have a mixed review of, but there's an awful lot that just looks like worn and rusty and great. And where I really feel like, oh, yeah, I mean, like you're using this, but like I'm not even sure that's going to work because that's so rusted over, right? Where like I really dig that. And I'm just like, oh, that looks amazing. But the people in it are like, you are buff, you are clearly eating beef
yeah,
every day,
yeah,
like,
yeah, chicken and broccoli for breakfast and weights after that. It's
yeah,
one of the things I find is 200 years is a long time, right? And I'll put this again to the Mad Max comparison. 200 years is a long time. If you haven't adapted and you're still suffering to find water in a world made of water, now I know you can't drink seawater. Yes, I get it. But if you haven't found a way of the body adapting, like, let's be honest, 200 years ago, right, we had people living in this country that would suffer from cholera and other illnesses because we had like sewage running down the middle of the street. Right,
yeah.
but we survived through it. They were drinking
You say
water.
200, but I mean, that was true 125 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
give or take, in Victorian London. I mean,
Yeah,
yeah, there was
and
absolutely sewage in that street.
100%. And they were both washing and drinking from the Thames at the same
Mm,
time. And in rural villages, they were drinking from wells that wouldn't have been purified, right? I get well water is probably better than some others, but like it's not good. It's only been in the last, I don't know, less than 100 years, as you say, probably the last 100 years that we've actually introduced piped water to
mm.
all homes that's actually got an element of filtering and that sort of thing. So if we can, I know we're a post-industrial civilization, but if you can't find a way of boiling water and cleansing it and taking out the salt and this other thing to produce hydro, then in 200 years, then you deserve to be dead.
Yeah. Well, then how are you still alive, right?
Yeah.
Floating on these little skiffs. Like, I don't know. I keep coming back to, you're absolutely right, of course. And I keep coming back to, I mean, even ignoring that you haven't found land and societies and organized around that land. Okay, even if you're at the ocean, I mean, I think of a few things. One is like you mentioned the Polynesians. I mean, the Polynesians navigated. I live in the middle of the Pacific, as
Mm.
far away from a major landmass as as exists on this planet. The Polynesians found this place, man.
Yeah.
Like they found, they went all over and they still do it.
Mm.
And you can take these, these catamarans, these boats out, and they navigate it by the stars. And but you think about like the amount of time it takes to go from like an island to like New Zealand, 2,000 miles away or something, and they did this shit. Like, you know, why would you not study how they did that, right? What did they have? And we know, like, what they have, they're still doing it. Like, study that. Maybe look to that as opposed to looking to like 1995 middle America suburban household and say, how can we transpose this onto water?
One of my favorite bits that comes back to that is towards the end of the film, Gregory, the old guy, pulls out a map and a sextant and says, in the before times, they used this to navigate by the sun and the stars. If I was one of those, I'd have punched him in the face and been like, sorry, you know how to navigate in this world, and you've never told us.
Yeah.
Like, because one of the first points in because navigation in this film really bothered me as well, because he's like, how are you going to find out where to go? And he follows that oil trail that's on fire to the ship. Fine, it's a good visual. I'm fine with that. But one of the things is that at the beginning of the film, he comes across that other boat, and the guy says, "Oh, if you go back 8 days that way, there's an atoll." And I'm like, "Cool." If you are reliant on finding atolls and stuff like that are plotted all over the place, like you would have a navigation system.
Right.
These trading posts exist. You would have a navigation system. You would need to. It would exist, and it would be a part of the language that people spoke in to talk about how you get places. And the fact that goes like, it's 8 days that way. And again, this one was like, this has not been thought out. Like they haven't given this any sort of level of imagination.
Well, to that point, how do they have compasses? Like in the Ulysses cut, how do they find even the coordinates when they're upside down on the girl's back?
So he does. Yeah, the old guy has a compass, a sextant, and a map.
Okay.
Which has not been referenced at any other point in the film.
It's just like, well, this will come in handy now that we need it.
Yeah, basically, he pulls them out of nowhere, and you're like, oh, were those in your, when he floats off at the beginning earlier in the film? I'm like, did you have those on your floaty thing then? Yeah, it's a real Deus Ex Machina where he just pulls out and goes, and then he's figured out how to use them as well. I'm just like, oh god. Fair enough.
Not cinema's finest moment.
No.
I don't know, like, everything. I don't know. There are things in this movie that I like, but I feel like everything irritates me. Everything irritates me in some slight way. And I keep thinking that, like, there's that really dumb sequence that has no business being in the movie, where Kevin Costner has the two girls aboard the boat, and he is approaching, a trading station, and for some reason, Dennis Hopper, despite being the main baddie and having an oil tanker, having already personally led a raid, is now on this trading station next to a guy who's pulling the strings of the dead people's arms to make them wave. But they haven't bothered to conceal the bodies that they've strung up.
Yeah.
Like, what? And there's guys underwater with snorkels, yet they haven't concealed the bodies. I mean, and then the guys underwater, the way they release themselves is they cut the ropes. And I'm thinking, like,
what are the ropes tied to, for a start?
Well, yes. Well, that's an excellent point. My immediate thought is like, how many 12-foot stretch of rope is left?
Yeah.
Right? Like there are like 12, I don't know, a dozen, 100, I don't know. You've just like severed 10 of them in order to catch the mariner.
Mm.
Like, I mean, every time that anybody fires a weapon in this movie, anytime that anybody cuts anything, destroys anything, uses anything, they use a crayon. I'm thinking like that's one of the last crayons left.
Yeah.
Like, you have a sense of that. Like, you think about like how good Interstellar is, and
Mm.
like we've got a limited amount of stuff on the ship. We're using it. I'm using. I mean, you have a sense of stakes, you have a sense of drama. Here, nobody ever recognizes any of this. I just That element annoys me constantly. Even the way Dennis Hopper smokes cigarettes. Where are these cigarettes coming from? Like, you're burning tobacco. Like, I used to be a smoker. There's got to be some better use for that.
Yeah.
At some point you'd be like, can we plant this? Can we figure something out for this? I mean, where are the cigarettes coming from? Where's
Well, I
the
think,
gasoline? I mean, none of
yeah.
this makes any sense.
No, they're because they're drinking like rum and whiskey and stuff, and you see in the background
In
of
the
some of the,
bottles.
yeah, you see like boxes and boxes of this stuff, but I've no idea where he salvaged it from, because as you've seen, everything's underwater, so I don't understand where it's come from, and it's not addressed. Like, they give you these ideas, and then they sort of like they undermine their own ideas by saying, "Oh no, you can't get to anything because it's all miles underwater and has been sank and is gone." Cool. Where did he get that Jack Daniels from then? Like, did they find a cargo ship of Jack Daniels? It's one of those things you sort of go like, it doesn't make a lick of sense.
Yeah, I mean, like if Dennis Hopper spoke into the camera and said, like, this post-apocalyptic world, I'm glad I've got a Jack Daniels to smooth out my mood. At least I would be
Tasty, yeah,
happy
yeah,
that I know it's product placement and like
yeah,
there's a weird meta logic to it.
yeah. It's like the clothing as well. I always find the clothing where they're all wearing like
Mm.
different bits and pieces. That survived 200 years. I mean, someone pointed this out to me. This timeline thing, I saw it in as we wrap up. I'll get to this. Timelines on post-apocalyptic movies are important because it tells you how far away they are from from us as a modern civilization. Because then you get the idea of if you do have sort of people that have degenerated, or how they're doing, if they've gone back into being a nomadic people or a farming people or whatever. What has been that journey? And so with this, they say it's been 200 years, or at least they suggest it's been 200 years. And you go, okay, cool. Then you are still like, he's found a CD player, and this is in the Ulysses cut. At one point,
Mm.
you have the mariner listening to CDs on a CD
What?
player. Yeah. I remember CD players from the mid-90s. You could sneeze next to those and the feckers would stop working. Like, not alone have them being at the bottom of the sea for 200 years. Stuff like that I'm just like, it doesn't make any sense. But then I will also go to Mad Max. Like, the first Mad Max film is a pre-apocalyptic film. Like, it's close because the world's going to shit, and then you have apparently a nuclear disaster which drives them into the second film, and obviously the third and the fourth. By the third film, it's supposed to have been a couple of decades. Like, Max is older, and so it's all this other stuff. However, the second film is supposed to be a lot sooner. And I'm still going like, wow, those people in Australia threw off civilization fast. Like, they were like a
Well,
couple.
look, in fairness, civilization in Australia were always, you know,
There's a
you know,
tenuous link. Like, but the moment they can don
yeah,
a
there's sort of,
jock strap and a hockey mask, they're like, right, I'm done, and I'm into this
yeah,
craziness.
they were friends with benefits more than
Yeah,
a marriage. Okay,
yeah, yeah. And so I do this one.
Sydney's an exception, right?
Yeah.
You get a mile outside of Sydney, you're fighting snakes the size of trees.
Oh yeah, 100%. Like, they're ready for that country is ready for the post-apocalyptic world instantly. But I love that someone pointed out, they were like, yeah, the rest of the world might be fine, and they've just not told Australia. They're just like, no, leave them to it. I want to see what happens. But yeah, I think timelines are important, and I think it tells a lot of things. And this one's so confused and doesn't seem to be
Yeah.
consistent that it begins to bother me by the end of the film, especially watching this time, and especially with the Ulysses cut, by 3 hours, and I'm going like, I'm the quieter stretches are longer, the action's slightly better, but it doesn't add up to a better film. That I'm like, director's cuts are supposed to have something more, like a different vision or a different themes. This doesn't have anything new other than extra time, where I'm just like, okay, it is just longer.
Um, before we go, can we talk about the sexual politics of this?
Mm,
Because I don't think this movie would be made today.
no.
I mean, so a few instances occur to me. One is as they're on the atoll, the woman who's being offered him,
Hmm.
they straight up offer him a woman who, as you point out, is pregnant, and it's hard for me to figure out watching it multiple times and rewinding it and going like, what did they say? Okay, so they and he is not interested. Then he's got, a young woman and a child, a female child on his ship, and he's trading with a woman and straight up sells the young adult
Hmm.
to this guy for sex and expects her to be raped. Presumably to protect the young girl, and the straighter guy who boards the ship straight up says like, I would prefer to have sex with the young child who's on your ship. Like, yeah, there's no way post
Can,
like 2010, let alone 2020, that's
can,
getting in the movie.
can we also talk about what he trades them for, which is quite important?
The
He
paper?
he trades them for paper, yeah, which is okay. It's treated as some sacred and crazy
Okay.
object. It's then revealed later in the film he's got boxes of this because he's got tons of like National Geographics, he's got another
Yeah,
books. So you're a bit
good
like,
point.
so you're trading for something that you already have. So you really don't care
Yeah,
about these
plus
people.
plus we've established like it's written on, like
Yeah.
there's no reason why you would value this in the first place.
Mm.
I mean, it's a relic of this old world that, I mean, yeah, none of this makes sense. But you're selling your guest.
Yeah.
Like this is essentially a guest in your home. I mean, he throws the daughter overboard, the little girl, he throws her overboard, almost kills her. He openly talks before that about murdering her,
Mm.
to save food. And then, also the young woman tries to proposition him and say, don't throw the young girl off board. I will have sex with you. There are things I can offer you, in exchange for the survival of a child. Like
Yeah.
this is some dark shit, man. Like, and it's never. I mean, the weird thing is that's in the serious part of the movie, where it should be about humanity is on its last legs. We're struggling to survive, and Kevin Costner is playing it straight.
Mm.
This is before it goes gonzo, uh, off the rail stuff. Um, and yet, like, and he refuses, but he refuses because he's like, I'm not into you. There's nothing you can offer me. Um, it's not clear entirely why, right? But he's clearly not offended by the proposition,
Well,
right?
yeah. No, I agree. This comes back to this characterization though. Like, what is it they wanted to achieve with the Mariner? Because we've talked about his comparison of the man with no name, right? They clearly, but they want to go like a darker version because the whole point of, especially the Eastwood version, is he rides into town, sees that this woman has been treated poorly, and sees the little kid run to the cell to see where the woman is, and he is, whilst slightly indifferent, is still sort of like moved, and he then pits the two families against each other. And his motivation is never really clear. It's quite ambiguous to the extent that for the American TV version, they had to put in a precursor of the governor giving him license to go and kill these people. And the same with Mifune. It's all about in Yojimbo. Yojimbo, it's sort of about he just comes across this place and sort of like he's trying to survive and ends up sort of pitting them against each other, so on and so forth. They've still got this honor. They've still got this sort of sense of purpose to an extent. But with the Mariner, like, yeah, he's just like so indifferent to these people. But like, there's an element of like, there's a difference between being indifferent and then just being a villain. And this thing of like him becoming, they want to make him grow softer and they want him to become more human. And this is the thing that irritates the crap out of me. Like throughout the film, they keep referring to him as by his mutation and saying, "Oh, that's a real human trait." And he looks at them, and I'm like, it's not that he's not human. He has
Mm.
gills, but he still has every other faculty that you have determined as a human. Like what has shown, maybe show that
Mhm.
his isolation has made him cold and stuff. But they don't, like, he cuts their hair off at one point. It's like a punishment.
Well, I guess the older woman.
Yeah, but it's then shown that he does it to both because
Okay, not in the not a theatrical cut.
okay. Well, you don't see it done to the little girl. He just walks towards her with a knife,
Oh, okay.
and then they're sat there and their hair's all muffed and it's really sort of short and this other stuff. And you're like, okay, but the purpose of that is, and I explain that because it's not in the theatrical cut. In the Ulysses cut, at the very start of the film, when you first get to the atoll, there's an old man on a rowing boat outside the atoll, and he's saying, "I will sell you my hair," and he's got like mad hair and a massive beard and
Mm.
stuff, and they're going like, "Oh, we could use that," and I'm like, "What for? What for? Like, what?" So hair is a tradable good. Like for what purpose? Like, can you weave it into clothing? Is that what you're doing? Like you've never shown that.
Maybe, right?
Yeah.
And
So
but then show that, right? Like
exactly.
make me feel like this is the desperate world where like hair is valuable because you can that's clothing or you
Yeah.
know uh
We haven't got sheep and other clothing to turn into wool, but we can use human hair maybe or something.
mm,
So there's these little bits, but I'm like, yeah, at what point, even watch this, I was like, at what point does he turn and for what purpose? Like he starts to become friendlier with them. But this is that problem I'm saying about the characterization of the Mariner, the sexual politics, all
mm,
that stuff would
mhm,
work again to an extent. I mean, you're right, it wouldn't be made today.
mhm,
Um, because he then goes off and because he then gives up the woman goes out and he sort of goes out and saves her, doesn't he? He changes his mind. But
mhm.
maybe this is just the performance. Like I don't understand why. At no point does something in Costner's face change that goes, oh, he's rethought this. Like he's thinking it through. It just sort of feels a bit more like, oh, this scene now leads into this scene. We're now learning that he's not as bad as we thought he was. And you're like, it doesn't work.
Yeah, it does feel like, your connection of it to the man with no name, I think, is apt. And it does feel like that same sort of thing of like, I've seen these tough guys. And I think this is like Kevin Costner, even though he didn't have a history with action, he had cachet in Hollywood.
Mm,
And that's why he was able to get this made and able to
mm,
get this done. Um, and I mean, the same thing happened with Bruce Willis and a bunch of other guys, where when you have too much power, a lot of men want to do the tough guy, and they have certain ideas about what that means, and it's more an idea of what the man with no name was than who he really was, right?
mm,
And it's amazing, like he doesn't speak, but you do have a sense of like an ethos, and he is tough and he's willing to let people, good guys and women and children get beaten and killed, but he also wants to prevent that as much as possible, and especially not be responsible for it.
mm.
You know and Kevin Costner, it's like, no, like, I remember that character as somebody who is tough but also redeemable. So I'm going to be tough and uncompromising, but also suddenly redeemable. Um, as opposed to really understanding a sort of nuanced portrayal where we can see it as a consistent character. Um, it is this kind of like a bad instance of um, anxiety of influence, right? Where
Mm.
you're misunderstanding the original text
Yes.
and misrepresenting it, but in a way that is less successful than the original, rather than inventing a new thing.
Well, yeah, 100%. And I think that's the problem. I say, because when I think of this thing of like, maybe it's the more modern thing. If you want to do this now, you give them either humor or give them something else, but you give them a vulnerability. There's almost like a moment where you see the tough guy being caught in a vulnerable position, and that can be something silly, like he really likes candy lollipops. I don't know, something like, there's a vulnerability, there's a chink in this tough guy's armor that shows that he isn't all just bravado and machismo. There's something else there. But without that, you sort of just end up with just like toxic masculinity. You go like, oh yeah, no, I don't like him, and he's unredeemable. Even when he does the things later on, you're a bit like, yeah, okay, like, why is he like this? He's been isolated. Okay, so what? Where did he's mutated? Okay, well, who are his parents? Where's his culture? Where's his society? Why does he not? Does he have an amnesia? Does he forget this? Like, and because there's this suggestion as well of there being more people like him out there, which is why one of his, if there would have been a sequel, I assume that would have been the mission for that.
Not to mention the Waterworld 2, the Revenge of Dennis Hopper.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's it. Wet Kev is what I call it now. Not Mad Max. It's just Wet Kev.
Oh my God, the Mariner.
Yeah. But it's just that first hour makes him almost irredeemable. And I think of like not so much Mel Gibson's Mad Max. Probably more so, actually, even Mel Gibson's Mad Max as well. That non-talking, lone man with no name kind of thing. They introduce humor and but also like vulnerability and silliness, like a bit of silliness. Tom Hardy's Max is the same. Like he has to have that element of like just sort of like, is he a bit kooky or is he insane? And there's something there that's more than being just stony faced and dull, really.
You in terms of the comparison to Mad Max, another thing that occurs to me, especially the stuff that I like, certainly Fury Road, is the sense of cinematography. And it is amazing how much a decent shot does for you. And I get that we're talking about 1995. The Mad Max movies were made for a dime, in the 1980s, right? Here, this is 1995. They've got money. This should not look like, a third generation National Geographic show. Like this is on the water. You spent a fortune to shoot, like, on a catamaran on the water. Like, we should see that bow going up with the waves. There's almost no waves. Like, there's no sense of the majesty. There's no sense of like the isolation of being out in the middle of nowhere, right? Like, all of this sense of just the beauty of the ocean, of the natural environment, of the kind of shots that you can get. And you're right about like the sun, like that irritates the hell out of me. Like, I mean, as somebody who's like fallen asleep or spent too much time on a beach and been like sick for weeks as a result, like, no, I mean, especially being a white person, like, no, you're gonna be messed up. These people, you all have skin cancer. Okay?
Yeah.
I mean, but there's no sense of, being under the sun. There's no sense of, just the beauty of the ocean. There's no sense of just like those shots of the waves. Where are all the waves?
I agree with that. Yeah, it's like there's got to be a tide, because that's the other thing as well. No matter where they go, I don't know the geographical expanse that they cover in this film. But the sea is flat throughout this film. And as you say, like, if you've got a catamaran, because they keep pulling down the sails, I'm like, cool. So there's a wind, cool. What and there should be like that threat of the sea, because again, one of the things we talk about is the isolation and other stuff. But the sea in and of itself is dangerous.
Oh
Like,
man.
and it's one of my biggest fears is being isolated out at sea. And like, yeah, why do I know there's like more budget and funding, but like there should be at least be some sort of like storm scene in this or something to show that
Ooh.
how dangerous the sea is, and he protects them in that case, or like the mariner just lashed to something on top of his catamaran as it goes through the sea, like something to show that he is used to all the different things that the sea can throw at you.
Mhm.
You know, you get more of that in Pirates of the Caribbean than you do in this film.
True.
And so yeah, I don't know. You're right. It feels flat. It feels very flat a lot of the time.
Well, and what I'm suggesting is that like the Mad Max movies and I mean, good post-apocalyptic stuff, it's able to sell its environment in part
Mm,
because of those shots. I mean, I don't know that, Fury Road has all that many comedic moments with Tom Hardy. I don't know that it sells even a consistent character with Tom
mm.
Hardy. I don't know that, I don't know what I think about any of those characters, but I know like it is a marvel to look at. Like there is no moment in this movie where I'm like, oh, that is a marvel to look at.
Mm.
Maybe the Exxon Valdez in a shot or two. I mean, maybe the rusty, prop plane. I mean, but we're talking about little glimpses. Like I don't know. I never you know I, and
It-
we've all seen so many great documentaries now, whether it's National Geographic or
mm.
like, The World or stuff like that, that just like take 40 cameras out on the ocean and they look amazing.
Yeah.
And you think like 1995 audiences would have just gone crazy to see that kind of stuff.
Well,
And there's nothing like that.
even and again, I think I've put it on the director really and cinematographer because um, one of the things is even when they have the battles, as you say, the action scenes, they do some fun stuff with like those skis jumping over, the ramps coming up and then jumping over. And they do it with the jet skis and some other bits and pieces. Fine. And then they have sort of like, within the set of the atoll, they have like, Kevin Costner swinging from thing to thing, and they have some bits and pieces like that. Cool. But it's, as you said as well, which I completely agree with, it's messy. And it should sort of feel a bit messy, but it should also feel like a battle. It should feel like a siege. Like that's a castle that's under siege, and so they're
Mm.
fighting back and stuff. And so it should feel coordinated a little bit more, and like the stunt should feel a bit bigger and grander and that sort of thing. And there's no sort of sense of choreography amongst the whole thing. It sort of feels a bit like this looks cool, that looks cool, move on. And I feel the same as well at the end with this sort of, because there's one other point I want to make about the character of the mariner before we move on. So as we get to the end, there's one shot of him alone walking up the
Mm.
the what's it
Exxon Valdez.
Exxon Valdez. And one of the things I find interesting about that is even that feels like a wasted shot because they do it as this massive, like, quite a sort of a wide shot, and I'm like, wow, you've got this massive cargo ship, this huge expanse. You could have this, there's low shots you could do coming up at this, as this isolated figure walks along it. You could show this expanse and the
Mm.
isolation. There's so many cool shots that you could be doing, and yet they choose this really sort of relatively flat mid-level shot that I'm just like, lack of imagination yet again. One more point I want to make about the Mara, because and this comes back. No, actually, I'll make it. Any other thoughts about though? You're right about this. The comparison to Mad Max and the way it looks.
No, I mean, keep going.
So the other thing I want to make a point. This is move on to the next point is about the consequences of this stuff. We find out that a lot of people died at the atoll and that they're now in this sort of like ring of boats and this other thing. Fine. We also find out that the Valdez is populated by hundreds of people, children, women, people, lots of people. They all try to row this massive thing right? And they are
Yeah,
lulled
that's
into,
crazy, by
yeah,
the way. I mean,
doesn't
like,
work, wouldn't
no,
work.
it
Yeah,
doesn't make sense. It's cool. I
yeah,
dig it.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
again, like a Frank Miller kind of like Mad Max way. I really love it.
Yes,
Yeah, but it does not belong in the same world as the BN.
exactly. I 100% agree. But I do love the shot when the oars come out and they're all running forwards and backwards. Like it looks cool.
It's
Um,
Gonzo.
it is. It's completely mad. But the point that's interesting is because one of the things is with the longer shot, you do see there's more of a religious conviction to what they're doing, that they are looking for this promised land and all this other stuff. So them running to the oars is way more sort of makes way more sense in the longer cut because they are like there's this religious conviction they are doing the right thing. However, the mariner then comes on and drops a flare into the oil tanker, and we go, "Oh, that's cool because you killed the old guy." And he says, "You know, oh, thank God." You've also just killed hundreds of women and children, and men, women, and children in the middle part of that boat.
Mm-hmm.
Hundreds to save a child and all sort of
Mm-hmm.
stuff like innocents that have just been that are looking to survive at the same time.
It's a very good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
And so I've never thought of it until this time where I saw him do it, and I'm like, you see the sides of the ship blow out,
Oh yeah,
and I'm like, huh, he's
you're
just,
a mass murderer. Like,
yeah, yeah, you've just
well, and
killed
also,
hundreds of people.
well, when I think about like the amount of ships, and this is why I hate that atoll scene. It's like in that atoll scene, if you were defending the atoll and you have a guy flip over on a jet ski,
Mm.
land in the mud, and you shoot him in the head, all right, to defend yourself. The very next thing you're going to do is grab him and grab that jet ski and desperately pull them onto the atoll because they represent resources.
Yes.
I mean, like, and vice versa, right? Like, I mean, nobody's going into the water,
Mm.
nothing's going into the water. And I just see them and I'm like, oh, wait a minute. The filmmakers think that this is a fort. They don't realize this movie is set at sea, do they?
No.
And, that kind of thought kept dawning on me through this whole thing. So, to your point, like, if all of humanity is what we've seen, right? Let's imagine 50% of humanity,
Mm.
25% of humanity is depicted in this movie. How much of it is destroyed over the course of this movie? Like,
Yeah.
and so when he drops that flare, which I'm not sure, I mean, it's supposed to be a badass moment, but it's like, I mean, I'm not sure that it works, but it's how much of humanity, like, granted, you're killing the bad guys, men, right? But how much of humanity are you destroying? How much of the survival of the human race are you eliminating, right? Even if it's under the control of this bad guy. I mean, it's worse than like blowing up the Death Star with everybody on board. Like, you might be eliminating like a significant percentage of all humans left alive, you know?
Well, more than that, what I would say, you're right. Yeah, it's 100%. Like it's killing off a large proportion of the surviving population. And yes, they have been serving under this deacon, but also they're pretty good engineers.
Hmm.
Like if you want to
And
go
they've
off,
got the largest ship.
yeah,
Like, they've got the closest thing to like dry land that anybody has.
yeah. So it's like kill off him, and this is the thing, isn't it? Like that thing of like, um, he doesn't want to be a leader, you know. But I was thinking, like, if you really wanted to take this film, it should be, or if you want to have this as like a religious allegory, would be he leads the people from to he shows them a better way, and they all end up on dry land, and they're like, oh yes, no, you're right, the mechanization of the deacon was wrong, and we're actually going to be one with the land or some shit like that.
Mhm.
But that should be like the arc or something, like that's what should take them back to the promised land. Like, yeah, no, gonna wipe them out, and we're fine with that.
Yeah. Well, as an American, I mean, murder solves all problems. I
Yeah,
mean, we're taught that from six. So, um,
hence
yeah, I
yes,
mean, it,
six, hence why a 6-year-old will then kill his teacher to solve their problem.
yeah, well, I
But
mean, maybe that teacher had a comic. That's what we're taught.
But
I say that as a teacher.
yes, but that's a problem. That, this is one of those films that I think the more you try and apply logic and things to it, the more it falls apart.
Yeah, I did find myself thinking like many of the movies that I like the most are like I tend to be, even though I think in real life I'm pretty comedic, I tend to like very thoughtful, artsy, sort of like what are the implications of this kind of movies. But watching this makes me think like, yeah, fuck it, man. Like, just go for the fun, go for the over the top. Like, I mean, if you don't really want to, at least if you don't want to spend the time thinking about what it would really be like and what the timeline is and how do you have water. Here's another thing. Where are all the animals? Where's the aquaculture? Right? Like you should totally be doing aquaculture. I mean, like, you know, tribal level humans did aquaculture and had, captive fish and stuff. We should be doing that, right? Why are they not? I mean, nothing about this makes any sense. If you're not gonna really do that, at least go the Dennis Hopper
mm-hmm.
route. And just know what you are and go that route completely. That is, I think essentially the problem of this film. Is it kind of wants to be Waterworld, the sophisticated, deep, allegorical, Ulysses' quest for home by the end, but it also wants to be the Exxon Valdez. And, I mean, there are these elements that just don't even make sense in that same movie.
I think that's the problem, isn't it? That's it. It wants to have its cake and eat it. It wants to be the thoughtful allegory for the the economic, ecological messaging, and it wants to be a crowd pleasing adventure film. But unfortunately, at even a theatrical version at over 2 hours in 1975, like that wasn't going to work. You have one or the other at this point, and I think they needed to pull the plug on parts of it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, I guess I would say this is a good enough movie that it has always made me want to see a better version of.
I agree with that. Yeah.
It is a good. I mean, even as a kid, I was like, okay, I can see like a good Aquaman movie can be done, right? I can see, a good like a good kind of serious movie coming out of this. I can also see a good crazy, Gonzo movie coming out of this. I mean, there are ideas here that live in my brain. None of them belong together. Like there's a bunch of ideas here and characters here and things that continue to live in my brain despite how this movie is maligned. And I don't think either of us are saying it's great or it's not Howard the Duck. Okay, I
No.
mean, I think that's a better movie than this, frankly. It knows what it is. um, but I will say there's a lot of this movie that lives in my brain and that I don't think is bankrupt in terms of ideas. It's just the execution is so god awful.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but there's a better version of it.
There is most definitely, and you could do this as like a legacy sequel. Have an old Kevin
Okay.
Costner come back as like an aging mariner, returning to dry land to sort of finally die or whatever, and finally coming across another mutated fish person or something, and pass on the legacy to somebody else. I don't know. There's ways of doing stuff. You could do this. I mean, hell, they're doing this kind of thing now with Avatar: The Way of Water. Like, I've not seen it. I'm still waiting for Disney Plus. But yeah, I think you could do this much better now. And like you say,
or run this as a premium cable show. Can you imagine what like an 8 episode like $100 million Waterworld TV show would look like? It could be terrible. That could be kind of amazing.
yeah, it could be really good. Yeah, it's possible. I mean, it's more than possible. And as you say, like, it shows that a good Aquaman film could be made. Maybe one day we'll get it.
Oh man,
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be Aquaman 2, granted, but
no.
we'll see what comes in the future. But yes, anyway, we'll wrap on it. Any final thoughts on Waterworld?
No, I think I've said my piece, and there's then some. It's amazing to get to talk about this.
Yeah, it's been good fun. It was good to watch it. It's good to go back to it. I think you say it's one of those frustrating films that sort of like there's a good film there, and I just wish they'd have lent into the craziness a bit more. And maybe one day I think we should do. Maybe I think Tank Girl would be really worth revisiting because I think that's a film that I think would probably maybe leaning more towards the Howard the Duck than the Waterworld, but I think that'd be worth seeing.
Yeah, one thing that occurs to me is John. Yeah, I think it's John Howard. His music is not amazing. In fact, there are many times where I think, oh, this is dated painfully. You could do a cut of this movie that was like a 2-hour cut with a little more appropriate music that knew it was a joke, that knew it was sort of fun. And this could be a really awesome movie. Like,
Yeah.
no doubt, you could use what you've got and make like an amazingly fun movie out of Waterworld.
I think that that's the thing with this. That's the problem, isn't it? There's a really sort of interesting film or fun film to be had in here, just not this version, and definitely not. I would say neither the theatrical version or the Ulysses cut really will be. I won't be revisiting the 3-hour version. Let me put it that way. But yes, anyway, we will be continuing. We're into the 90s now. I forget what is next. What is next on our list of things?
Well, Scott, let me tell you what you've won. All right, A Dark City, 1998,
Ah, yes,
a classic,
yeah,
undiscovered, underrated sort of.
and another one with a notorious director's cut as well. So that'd be interesting to find out about. So yes, Dark City, a film with a twist and a little bit interesting sort of noir, sci-fi, dystopian film. Interesting elements that we'll definitely talk about that. Look forward to that. Excellent. Anyway, Julian, thank you very much for taking a dip with me and talking Waterworld.
It's my pleasure. As an inhabitant of Hawaii, I recognize Polynesian culture and the future of the world, and we'll be prepared for it. When Breton sinks into the ocean, I'll be out on a catamaran, swimming with Kevin Costner.
Yeah, sounds paradise. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for sticking with us and going through this thing. I wonder what you think of Waterworld. Is it the massive flop that it was? And do you agree with our opinions? Or are we wrong? Is this actually a classic and you think this holds up and it's massively underrated? I'm interested to see what people think. Try and defend it for us. Anyway,
please.
Yeah. And if you like what we do, please leave a review. Let us know. On any podcast, catch a 4-star, 5 stars, any stars. All feedback is much appreciated. And of course, please check out our Patreon, www.patreon.com/20CG Media, 20th Century Geek Media. And we do more things on there, especially trekking through the Twilight Zone, which I know is coming in on the main feed, but we are way ahead on the Patreon feed. So much more on there. 3 seasons worth now. Anyway, Julian, thank you very much.
It's my honor as always.
Yeah, and the next episode will be in the Dark City. So, ladies and gentlemen, we shall see you on the next episode.
There's something very important I forgot to tell you.
What?
Don't cross the streams.